I did not raise my voice when I found out. After 19 years running the finest custom furniture workshop in 3 counties, I thought I was walking back into a life I had built with my own 2 hands. Instead, my younger brother was sleeping in my bed, running my company under his name, and he offered me a bunk in the tool shed to keep me off his conscience. I did not argue. I simply nodded, picked up my old canvas work apron, and asked him where he wanted me to start. What he didn't know was that I had already made one phone call from a payphone outside the courthouse, and the machine that was about to take everything from him had already started turning. Before I tell you exactly how a 58-year-old man with nothing but a duffel bag brought down an empire built on his own name, let me know, friend, where you're tuning in from tonight, and if you believe a debt like this always comes due, hit that like button and stay with me. The prison bus let me off 2 blocks from the county courthouse in Millbrook, Ohio, a little after 4 in the afternoon. I stood there for a long moment in a donated windbreaker that smelled like a stranger's closet, squinting against a sun I hadn't felt on my face without a fence between us in 19 years. I was 58 years old. My knees ached from the cold, my hands ached from decades of sawdust and cheap prison soap, and I stood on that sidewalk waiting for someone, anyone, to come get me. Nobody came. I told myself Marlene had probably lost track of the date. I told myself my brother Curtis had probably gotten stuck at the shop, because Curtis was always stuck at the shop, always the one who stayed late, always the one who called himself the reliable one. I waited an hour and a half on a bench outside a shuttered hardware store before I finally accepted that no one was coming for me, and I started walking. It took me 3 hours to walk the 11 miles home, out past the grain silos and the old railway crossing, my duffel bag cutting into my shoulder the whole way. I let my mind travel back, the way it always did on long walks, to the day everything fell apart. 19 years ago, Whitlock & Sons Fine Woodworking was mine. I'd built it from a one-car garage into a business that supplied custom cabinetry to half the estates in the Tri-County area, with a reputation so clean that architects wrote our name into their blueprints. Curtis came on as my partner when he was 31, freshly divorced and broke, and I gave him 30% of the company because he was my little brother and family takes care of family. Then the fire marshal's report came back. Someone had been storing improperly sealed lacquer thinner next to the kiln in violation of 6 different codes, and when the whole east wing burned to the ground with 2 seasonal workers inside, someone had to answer for it. Curtis showed up at my kitchen table the night before the hearing, sobbing, telling me if we both went down, the business would die and Marlene and our daughter Ivy would have nothing. He begged me to say the storage decision had been mine. He swore on our mother's grave that he'd keep the company alive, keep Marlene safe, raise Ivy right until I came home. I was a fool who loved his brother more than he loved the truth, and I told the judge it was my fault. When I finally reached the end of our gravel driveway that afternoon, the first thing I noticed was the sign. The hand-painted Whitlock & Sons board I'd carved myself was gone, replaced by a laser-cut sign reading Curtis Whitlock Fine Woodworking in gold letters. I stood there staring at it for a long time before I pressed the buzzer at the gate. A voice I didn't recognize as belonging to anyone but my own blood answered, thick and lazy with confidence, and told me to come on up. Curtis was standing on the porch of the house I had built with my father's old hand tools, wearing a barn coat that cost more than I'd made in a year of prison labor, and around his wrist was our father's gold watch, the one thing I'd asked the warden to mail to my daughter and never received. He looked at me like I was a delivery he hadn't ordered. He said, almost cheerfully, that he never thought I'd actually come back to town. He led me inside, past walls that used to hold my daughter's height marks penciled into the doorframe, now painted over in a flat contractor white. Marlene came down the stairs a moment later. She was 54 now, her face pulled tight from procedures that made her look like she was perpetually startled, and she looked at me the way you look at a water stain on a ceiling, something unpleasant you'd rather not deal with today. Curtis reached over and put his hand on the small of her back, casual as anything, and told me they'd gotten married 4 years into my sentence. He said my absence had been too hard on everybody, and that he'd simply done what any decent man would do. Before I could find words, the front door opened and my daughter Ivy walked in. She was 29 now, and I hadn't seen her since she was 10 years old, crying in a courtroom hallway. She was dressed sharp, a blazer, a leather portfolio under her arm, and she stopped cold when she saw me. I waited for her to run to me. Instead, she looked at Curtis, and Curtis nodded at her like he was granting permission, and only then did she say, flatly, "Hey, Dad," Curtis announced, beaming. That Ivy was head of design now, his right hand, the future of the company. My own daughter had built her career standing on the ashes of my name, working for the man who put me in a cell. They didn't throw me out that first night. Curtis, drunk on his own sense of magnanimity, invited me to sit at the table while Marlene served pot roast on the china my mother had left me. I sat there in a windbreaker that wasn't mine, my hands shaking under the table, while the three of them talked over me like I was a piece of furniture that had wandered in from the yard sale. Marlene finally set down her fork and told me, without a trace of shame, that my conviction had humiliated the family for 2 decades, and that Curtis had spent all that time quietly rebuilding what I'd burned down. She said there simply wasn't room for me in their lives anymore. Curtis leaned back, swirling his glass of bourbon, and put on the face of a generous man doing a hard thing. He said he wasn't cruel. He offered to let me sleep in the old tool shed out back, and to give me $800 a month, enough for a cheap room somewhere and groceries, on the condition that I take a job as the overnight shop sweeper at the very workshop that used to bear my name. He said it would give an old ex-con a sense of dignity. Ivy, my own daughter, wiped her mouth with a cloth napkin and told me flatly that I should just take the offer, that I was a relic, and that the kindest thing I could do for everyone was disappear quietly into the background. 19 years in a cell teaches a man things a courtroom never can. It teaches you to swallow every scream that rises in your chest. It teaches you how to smile at the people who've taken everything from you and let them believe completely that you are broken. I looked around that table at the 3 people who had stolen my life out from under me, and I did not raise my voice. I nodded. I told them they were right, that I was tired, that a broom and a paycheck sounded like more than I deserved. The look of smug satisfaction that crossed Curtis's face made my stomach turn, but it was exactly the look I needed him to wear. I needed him comfortable. I needed him certain. That night I walked the 1.5 miles into town and rented a room above the old laundromat, the kind of place where the radiator clanks all night and the wallpaper peels in the corners like old skin. I bought a prepaid phone from the gas station on Route 9, sat down on the edge of a mattress that sagged in the middle, and dialed a number I'd kept memorized for 19 years. Franklin Doyle picked up on the second ring. Franklin was 53 now, a sharp, relentless contract attorney who'd been a broke paralegal working nights when I first met him, back when I quietly paid his tuition to finish law school because he was smart and had nobody in his corner. He'd sworn, back then, half joking, that he owed me his whole career. When he heard my voice on that burner phone, he went dead silent for almost 10 seconds. I didn't waste time on pleasantries. I told him I was out, and I told him exactly what I'd walked into. He asked me what I wanted to do. I looked out that grimy window toward the dark shape of the workshop roofline 1.5 miles away, the building I designed with my own hands, and I told him it was time to activate the reversion clause. See, here's what Curtis never knew, what not even Marlene knew. 15 years before the fire, back when I first brought Curtis on as a partner, I had my own lawyer draw up the original partnership agreement myself, and buried in the fine print was a reversion clause tied to felony conviction of either partner. If either of us was convicted of a felony connected to willful safety negligence at the company, full controlling ownership would automatically revert to the other partner's designated trust the moment that partner was released from incarceration, provided the released partner formally reasserted the claim within 1 calendar year. Curtis had signed it without reading past the signature line, the same way he signed everything, trusting that his big brother would never use it against him. I had built my own trapdoor 19 years before I ever needed to fall through it, and I had exactly 12 months from my release to pull the lever. Putting on that gray janitor's uniform felt like folding myself into a stranger's skin. 19 years ago, I walked through the front doors of that workshop as the man whose name was burned into every piece of furniture that left the building. Now I came in through the loading dock at 11 at night, holding a push broom and a ring of keys with a laminated badge that read simply, Main Tenants. The place had changed. The warm cedar smell I remembered was gone, replaced by the flat chemical scent of cheap finish, sprayed on for speed instead of quality. I pushed my cart down hallways I had designed, past a design studio where fluorescent lights buzzed over desks, where my daughter's team churned out cabinetry nobody would remember in 5 years. There is a strange power in being completely beneath notice. When people decide you're finished, they stop looking at you. You become part of the wall. Over the following weeks, I learned the rhythms of the place, the way I once learned the grain of good oak, patiently, with my hands. Ivy worked late most nights, and the first time she passed me in the hallway, Her heels clicking on the polished concrete, my chest tightened so hard I thought it might crack. She was on her phone, snapping at some vendor about a shipping delay, and she walked past me without so much as a flicker of recognition, her shoulder brushing my uniform sleeve, the way you'd brush past a rack of cleaning supplies. Curtis was no different. He'd stroll out of the corner office that used to be my drafting room, laughing with new investors, and toss his coffee cup into my trash bin without ever once looking at my face. They had handed the keys to their entire kingdom back to the man who forged them, and they never even noticed. I used that invisibility like a chisel. My route required me to clean every office in the building, including the private design vault upstairs where Curtis kept the real financial ledgers, the ones the accountant only saw a sanitized version of. Curtis had installed a keypad on that door himself, so proud of his little 4-digit fortress, assuming a broom pusher would never think to watch. But arrogance makes men careless. As I mopped the hallway outside night after night, I watched his reflection in the darkened window glass as he punched in his code while chatting on his phone, and inside of a week I had it memorized just from the rhythm of his fingers. I learned the guard's coffee break schedule down to the minute. I learned which camera in the east corridor had a 40-second blind spot every time it swept toward the loading dock. I emptied trash cans, but I didn't just empty them. I unfolded every crumpled memo, every torn invoice, every Post-it note scrawled with numbers that didn't belong on a Post-it note, and I read them under the bare bulb of the supply closet in the basement. I was building a map piece by piece, the way I used to build a cabinet from raw lumber, and nobody in that building had any idea the ghost pushing the broom could read their whole operation like a blueprint. 3 weeks in, I finally let myself into the design vault. My own tension wrench, an old jeweler's tool I'd kept from a hobby decades ago, popped the lower filing drawer in under a minute. Beneath a stack of blank company letterhead, I found a black hardbound ledger, and what I read inside it made my hands go cold, in a way 19 years of prison winners never had. Curtis wasn't just running the shop into mediocrity. He was siphoning company funds, disguised as materials sourcing, into a string of shell purchases that funneled straight into a failing strip mall development he'd secretly bankrolled 2 counties over, a development that was hemorrhaging money, months behind on permits, and buried under predatory short-term loans he'd personally guaranteed. He was bleeding Whitlock & Sons dry, dollar by dollar, to keep his side project on life support, and if that mall collapsed under its debt, it would take the whole workshop down with it, along with 42 employees who had families and mortgages, and no idea their paychecks were built on sand. 19 years I sat in a cell believing my sacrifice had kept this place alive for the people who worked here. Standing in that vault with the ledger open under a small brass lamp, I understood that Curtis had been prepared to burn it all down anyway, the moment it stopped being convenient for him. I photographed every page with the burner phone, careful with the lighting, careful to capture every routing number and every forged materials invoice. Then I put everything back exactly as I'd found it, wiped the desk clean, and locked the drawer behind me. I wanted Curtis walking in the next morning feeling like the smartest man in 3 counties. I wanted him comfortable right up until the moment the floor disappeared beneath him. I pushed my cart back out into the hallway with something steady settling into my chest, something that wasn't anger anymore. It was resolve. I had found my match. Now I needed the gasoline. It was a rainy Tuesday, past midnight, when I nearly lost the whole plan in a single careless moment. I was running the floor buffer through the main showroom when the front door chimed and heels clicked sharp across the polished concrete. It was Renee, Ivy's fiancée, a real estate broker who'd never met me before my release. She stopped dead when she saw me, her face twisting into open disgust, like I was something tracked in on someone's shoe. She snapped that I wasn't supposed to be out here in the showroom, that maintenance stayed in the back corridors after hours. I kept my head down, my voice small and apologetic, playing the broken old man to the hilt. She stepped closer, arms crossed, and told me Ivy was mortified having a convict for a father skulking around the building she was trying to build her name in. She brought up the company's 20th anniversary gala happening that Saturday, warned me that I'd been assigned to run the coat check in the back hall, and told me if I embarrassed Ivy in front of any client or investor, she'd personally see to it I lost even the shed I was sleeping in. I let her talk. Arrogant people always say more than they mean to. And by the time she stormed off toward the elevator, I had learned exactly which investors were flying in for Saturday night and exactly what time the board planned to sit down for the anniversary toast. Saturday night, I stood in that cramped coat check closet in an ill-fitting black vest, hanging $2,000 coats on wire hangers while string quartet music drifted in from the main floor. Curtis moved through the crowd like a king, shaking hands, toasting 20 years of a legacy he'd stolen the front half of. I watched Ivy laugh at something an investor said, radiant, confident, utterly unaware that her father was 12 feet away hanging up jackets. Around 9:30, Franklin slipped in through the side entrance in a charcoal suit, carrying a slim leather portfolio, and found me in the shadow of the coat rack. He gave me one nod. It was time. We walked into the main hall together, and the room went quiet in stages, the way a pond stills after a stone breaks the surface. Curtis was mid-toast, champagne glass raised, when he spotted me walking toward the small stage with Franklin at my side, and his face drained of color like someone had pulled a plug. He set his glass down too hard, cracking the stem, and demanded to know what the hell I thought I was doing. I told him, calm as still water, that I'd come to formally reassert my ownership claim under the reversion clause of the original 2007 partnership agreement, and that as of that filing, made 40 minutes earlier at the county recorder's office before the doors ever opened, full controlling interest in Whitlock and Sons had legally reverted to my name. The room erupted into confused murmuring. Curtis laughed, that same loud, hollow laugh cornered men always reach for, and told the investors I was a deluded old convict who'd spent too many years breathing sawdust. He reached for his phone to call security. Franklin stepped forward before he could dial, unlatched his portfolio, and set a stack of certified documents on the linen-draped table with a thud that cut through Curtis's laughter like a gunshot. Franklin explained, in that same unhurried, devastating tone he used to demolish opposing counsel, that as of this morning, my legal team had also acquired the outstanding note on Curtis's strip mall development 2 counties over, purchased at a discount from a lender desperate to offload a failing asset. He explained that because Curtis had personally guaranteed that note using Whitlock and Sons equipment and inventory as collateral, illegally, without board authorization, the note was now callable in full, effective immediately, and my legal team was calling it. Curtis's face collapsed. The investors who'd been laughing along with him a minute earlier now stared at their champagne like it had turned to poison. One older board member, a silver-haired man named Harmon who'd known me back before the fire, stood up slowly and asked if any of this was true. Franklin slid a folder in front of each board member and told them to turn to the second page, where the reversion clause sat in black and white beside Curtis's own signature, dated 15 years earlier. I watched the color drain from Ivy's face as she read her name listed among the assets the company held, design contracts she didn't even know were tied to ownership stakes. Curtis had quietly restructured behind her back to keep her loyal and unaware. I stepped forward and told the room, quietly, that come Monday morning, every account, every vendor contract, and every payroll authorization at Whitlock and Sons would answer to me. I told them the man they'd been toasting for 20 years had never actually earned a single board of that legacy, honestly, that he'd built his kingdom on a confession he'd begged from his own brother's mouth. Curtis sank into a chair, one hand pressed to his chest, staring at the floor like the ground itself might open and finish the job. The champagne toast that had started the night as a celebration of an empire ended it as a public funeral for one, and I stood in the wreckage in a rented black vest, feeling nothing but a clean, cold quiet where 19 years of grief used to live. The following week, once the dust of asset transfers and county filings had begun to settle, Ivy showed up alone at my rented room above the laundromat. She stood in the doorway for a long moment before she came in, and when she finally spoke, her voice cracked in a way I hadn't heard since she was 10 years old. She said she never knew the reversion clause existed, that Curtis had told her for years I'd chosen prison as an easy way out and had never fought to come back for her. She cried and told me she was sorry and asked if I could give her a role in whatever came next, a real one she'd earn instead of one. Curtis had handed her to keep her quiet. I sat across from her at that small kitchenette table and told her the truth. I told her that giving her anything right now, out of guilt or love or the ache of 19 lost years, would be the worst thing I could do for her. I told her Curtis had taught her that talent and ambition mattered more than honesty, and that lesson had to be unlearned before it cost her everything the way it had cost him. I told her the only inheritance worth having was the kind you built with your own calloused hands, the way I once did, the way my father did before me. I told her if she wanted a place in the new company, she'd start on the floor, sanding and sweeping like everyone else, and earn her way back up on merit alone, not blood. She left in tears that night, but she came back Monday morning in work boots, And that told me more than any apology could have. Curtis was indicted 11 weeks later on charges of fraud and illegal collateralization. The strip mall project seized and liquidated to cover the note, his half of everything gone to restitution and legal fees before the ink on the paperwork was even dry. Marlene filed for divorce the same month the indictment hit the local paper, moved into a small apartment on the far side of town, and stopped answering when Ivy tried to call. I sold my stake in Whitlock & Sons 8 months later to a regional furniture cooperative that promised to keep every employee's job intact and every process built the way I'd always run it. Honest lumber, honest hands, no shortcuts. The check they handed me had more zeros than I'd ever expected to see in one lifetime, and Franklin, closing his briefcase across that mahogany table, asked me what a 59-year-old man was supposed to do with that kind of freedom. I told him I didn't want a bigger house or a faster truck. I told him I wanted quiet. These days, I live outside a small town in the Blue Ridge foothills, on 11 acres with a creek running along the property line and more sky than a man knows what to do with. I built the cabin myself, board by board, the way I built everything worth having in this life. There's no gate at the end of my driveway, no keypad, nothing to keep anyone out because there's nothing in here anyone needs to steal. My mornings don't start with a bell or a buzzer anymore. I wake up when the light does, grind my coffee by hand, and sit on the porch listening to the creek run over the same stones it's been running over for longer than any of us have been alive. Some mornings I read the local business paper on my phone, just to see the last fading echoes of the storm I set loose. Curtis is serving a 4-year sentence 2 hours from here, and from what I hear, nobody visits. Marlene works retail now, at a shop she once would have considered beneath her. And Ivy, my daughter, calls me every Sunday evening, and last month she told me she'd been promoted to shop floor supervisor, a title she earned with sanded knuckles and honest hours, not a gift wrapped in a stolen name. People expect me to carry some quiet grief over what happened to my brother, to the family I used to have. I don't. They built their comfort on my sacrifice and were prepared to burn it all down the second it stopped serving them, and I simply handed them the consequences they'd already written for themselves. I don't owe them another ounce of my sorrow. If this whole ordeal taught me anything, friend, it's that blood is not the same thing as loyalty, and love without honesty is just a longer, crueler kind of theft. Never hand someone the axe and then act surprised when they use it on the tree that's feeding them too. Your name and your word are the only things in this life nobody can ever really take from you unless you hand them over yourself. If this story meant something to you tonight, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and stick around, because there's always another story of the truth finding its way home.